All right, welcome. It's week 9. This is our algo day. What we have is first off, a little bit of housekeeping. Make sure you do your discussion question. There is no core assignment this week. So please just make sure you go do your discussion question. And like Kevin said last week or last class, sorry, this is a great time for you to catch up. If you're falling a little bit behind, if you're not at that 90%, please make sure you kind of catch up this week. It's kind of why we build this in. What we're going to do today is we're going to finish kind of our entire goal for this week was to do create and read. What we did last class is we figured out the create portion. Now we're going to do the read portion, which is not too much, but it might take 15-20 minutes to do that. And then we'll review the materials, kind of go over that. And if we have time, I have an algo for us that we can do. So we'll kind of jump in and see where we're at. And if we got about 30 minutes, then maybe we can just do the algo together. But I want to make sure you guys understand the materials and kind of walk through what's going on. Cool. If we remember, we're making video games and we have a couple different things when we're set up. We've got this server PY. That's going to have our functionality for right now. Now, next week, we're going to jump in and let me pull up our class calendar. So that way we can understand what's going on for next week. Next week, if I can find the date. Next week, we're going to be doing CRUD Part 2, but we're going to be doing something called modularization. Now, right now, everything is coming in my server PY file and my video game PY. We are going to move everything basically out of my server PY. There's going to be like 2 or 3 lines in my server PY. And we're going to modularize and break it down into something called controllers, into a model, which is really just this file, and then a config folder, which is what has this. The idea behind it, and we're going to talk more about this on Tuesday, is that as you build these sort of complex projects, what you really want to do is kind of modularize or take it out. So if we are dealing with, right now we're dealing with video games, I want to have all of my video game functionality in one place. If we're dealing with users, I want all my user functionality in another place. And the idea behind it is if there's a bug or if there's an issue, it's much easier to find. If we know it's within my users, okay, here's my folder with all my user stuff. And I'm not looking at some monolithic file. So if you guys get a chance, kind of practice modularization. It's really just taking everything out of my server PY and into the correct place. But for right now, we're doing everything within my server PY. What we did is we've got a couple different things. We have our config file, which we went over. What this does, this connects to my database. And remember, this comes from the platform. You can copy and paste. You don't need to change it. The only thing you potentially need to change is if you have a different user or password, then we need to update that. Other than that, you can keep it as is. And I'm going to refer to this quite a bit as we are kind of walking through it, because I did something yesterday with another class, kind of walked through and everybody said it was really helpful. They're on week 13. So I'm going to try to do this earlier with you. So hopefully it helps 4 weeks ahead of time. Not that them being ahead, not that it's an advanced topic, it's just a different way to look at it. So we're gonna kind of follow how that goes. We created this model. We haven't called it a model yet, but that's what it is. It is really just this class instance, right? A video game where we've got an ID, which is something that is already created. MySQL handles that for us, created at and updated at. We put a default expression of current timestamp and current timestamp on update current timestamp. So we don't have to pass in any of that information, but anytime we want to create a new video game, it requires this information, right? We need a title, a rating, a platform, and a development studio. So the way we get information is we create forms, right? And so what we can do is we can have these forms, or have this form. And what happens is my user looks at this, they fill out my form. When they press submit, it goes to create game, which lives in which file? Where does create game live? Do you guys remember?
Server.py.
Yeah, my server.py finds that and says, okay, I've got this post request because it's coming from a form. What do you want me to do with it, right? And within that request, we have this thing called form, right? So we can say request.form. And just as a reminder, this value here on the right must match whatever the name of the input is. What's on the left can be anything we wanted. It is imperative, I would say, make it be the same. But this could be anything we wanted. We just want, this needs to come from my form right here. So once we do that, we create this variable data. And can anybody remember, why do we have game ID here? Why did we create a variable? If you don't remember, that's okay.
It was to link it, and I believe it was to I'm trying to remember. I know it was to link it and for it to connect with something, but I can't remember what exactly at the
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah, so we'll be using that in the future if we have a user, let's say. We'll be taking this ID if we create a user and putting it in session so I could link and say who is navigating on my page. Really close, yeah. Now, the reason we can do that is because when I say video game, which is my class here, that I import at the top, I say from my file name, video game, import my class name, video game. I say, okay, I want to game ID equals video game dot create game and pass it my data that I need to create. So it goes into my file, finds create game. Here's my query. And then here is this. These values come from the values on the left here, right? And so, and so what we're doing is we are inserting, which is creating. I'm just creating my query here. Now, if I hadn't done current timestamp and on update current timestamp, what would I also have to add in here? You guys remember? Sorry.
You you would have you said you had to add the now.
Yeah, exactly. Remember when we did MySQL Workbench and I created our ERD, I did a default expression that said current timestamp, um, current timestamp on update current timestamp. That makes MySQL already do it for me. Had I not done that, or if you forget about it, you do then have to pass in a created at. That's not correct. And an updated at, right? Because you need to, oops, you need to say, hey, I need to update these values because we need those. And then we would pass in a now and now. All right, that's going to give the current, let me do this a little bit easier. That's going to give the current timestamp at that time. But because we already put those default values, we don't need that. And then I'll delete here. Cool. Does anybody remember, why do we have a percentage sign and an S after? Anybody remember?
Um, I'm trying to remember, but because I looked at the video today, it said it had to do something with security.
Yeah, exactly. There's this thing called SQL injection. And what SQL injection is people sometimes try to mess with your data, return values, XYZ. And so this prevents that from happening. So by putting it this way, it just makes it a string. So even if they try to do nefarious things, or what they'll try to do is put their own queries into a value, and then it kind of can drop all your users or just kind of wreak havoc. We can do it this way, and that prevents that from happening. Cool. And then, so that's just my query. And then what we say is game ID equals connect to MySQL. This runs from this file here. It runs this method, which returns an instance of MySQL connection. So it returns a new connection because it establishes, it runs when we call MySQL connection. What is this called? Do you guys remember what this function is called?
Decorator? No,
Close. It's a constructor.
constructor.
Right? This is when this is class is called, this is the first function that's called. Right? This creates it. It constructs a new instance. And what this is doing is this is creating a connection to my database with my values that I pass in. That's why the username and password need to be your username and password. And that's it, right? We create our connection. And since we are querying off of this, we have our connection alive and well, then it immediately, this is called chaining a method, immediately runs this. And because we did insert, right? It finds insert, there's select, which is like our get all, update and delete. Okay. So because we're inserting, we're creating, it runs, or it runs this, tries to query, it will print running the query plus whatever our query is. And then it'll find if it's insert, it will commit that, and then it will return the last or the ID of whatever we just created, right? And so that's why we say game ID, because that's what it's giving us. Once we create that new value, it gives us the ID back. So we just set it as a value, and then we return that. That comes here, and that is what makes game ID. And then we are redirecting to dashboard. That's what we did on Monday. So what we want to do is we want to be able to get, I'm sorry, are there any questions? Okay. What we want to do is now we've created, so that's the C in CRUD. Let's go ahead and read. And so first off, let's read our,
For the most part, that's absolutely true. And you could,
let's read our, let's read all of our values. So if I wanted to create a new method that's going to read all of my video games, what file am I going to do that in?
Can you repeat the question, Will?
Yeah, so we've created, right? We said we've established that we can create a video game. Now, if I want to read all my video games, which is going to mean that we need to use a query and connect to my database, where's that sort of method or functionality going to live? Do I do it in my server? Do I do it in my, where's my query and connection to the database and it actually pinging the database? Where's that going to be? Let me ask the question a different way. Is anything in this file right here, server PY, is that actually hitting my database, or is it redirecting to a place to then hit my database and create?
I believe it's going to hit your database because hold on. No, I don't think it is. I think that will be in the other file on the MySQL.py.
The MySQL.py?
Yeah, I think. I don't
Okay.
know.
Let's do this, and I think this might help. We're gonna walk through what's happening right here. Let's just walk through the entire process. So I'm gonna make this as big as I can so I can write as big as I can. Okay. So when well, let me first make this. We're gonna have our front end, our back end, and then we're gonna have our database. We'll make the green, sure. So let me go ahead and type these. So I'm gonna say front end. Say back end. Oops, sorry, I can't see. Because it's in white. And then we're gonna have our DB. Cool. So let's think about the user experience. What does my user see? Where is my user at? In this section right here, where's my user? What do they see?
The user sees the front end.
Yeah, they do, right? They see this index.html. They see this form. So I'm going to use a different color because I can't see it. I'm going to say form, right? So they're on my form. When they click this button, this create game button, what happens? What is my computer going to do?
It sends a signal to the back end.
Yeah, it sends a request. Exactly, Kevin. It sends a request. So, yep. It's going to send a request to my backend. Great. Where on my backend is it going to send that request to?
One of the app.routes.
Exactly, Kevin. It's going to look for, and what is the route it's going to look for?
Well, we would need to have, can I take a look at the server.py?
Yep.
So it's going to, so it's going to go to the app.route create game. Well, that is contained within the, well, so basically it returns the redirect to the dashboard. So it goes to so it basically goes from there to the, app.route create game, and then from there to it redirects you to the dashboard.
Okay. Yeah. Let's
On the
go
bottom.
let's go. That's exactly right, Kevin. But let's go one step at a time because a lot of stuff's happening in between there. So it's going to go to my create game. And how do we know just from this file? How do we know it's going to go there? What in this file tells me it's going to go into my server PY? And or specifically, it's going to look for create game.
The action.
Exactly. Right. And the whole point is I want to
Yes.
make sure that you guys are thinking how the computer works, right? So when they click this button, it's going to go up here and say, oh, I've got an action. I've got a route. And it's going to go into my server PY. And it's going to make that request. And it's going to find it. First, it's going to say, are you create route? You're not. Are you create route? You are. And I've got a post request. Right? First off, it's going to say, do you accept post requests? Right? Because if I didn't have this here, it's going to cause me an error, right? Because my form, it's weird. My form, sorry, is a method post, right? And so it's going to say, hey, I've got a post request and my server at this route, and my server PY is going to either say, yes, I can accept that, or no, I can't. Right? And if it says no, I can't, that means that we forgot to set up my methods post. But we set it up correctly. So it says, yep, I can take that request. And then it says, okay, well, what do you want me to do? Well, let's run this function called create game. Create game, and we jump into it and say, okay, great, I can run that function. What do I want to do? So it creates data. So it's still on my server PY. It creates data. And then it gets to this variable right here called game ID. It says, okay, I need to create game ID, and what is its value? Well, its value is this. So what do you think it does? What do you think it does? What happens when I say a variable is equal to a function?
So that's it. Isn't it kind of what we were doing in OOP?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know.
Remember,
I'm a little bit rusty at OOP.
it's okay. That's okay. Remember, a function's value is whatever it returns, right?
Right.
But does and this is kind of hear me out here. Yes, we have this function create game, but does this function create game live on this file? These are different.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't, right? What file does that live on?
Videogame.py.
Exactly. So what I've got to do is then go here. My computer goes to, and let me type in. Goes to video game py, right? With my request. It's saying, hey, I have this request. I need, in order for me to finish what I'm wanting to do, I need to go here. So it hops over here and it looks and says, okay, there's the video game. Great. Is there a method called create game? And it finds it, and there is, right? And we are giving data, right? So it says when it goes to this page, it's taking with it the data variable that we created. If this was called unicorn, we would pass in unicorn. So now that it's in the video game PY, it finds create game, so this method. And then what does it do? What's the first thing it does?
It creates a query.
Exactly, right? It creates this variable. And then the second thing it does is it creates another variable called game ID. Now, what is game ID equal to? Think about the same kind of question of this. What is game ID equal to? It's equal to the result of these function calls, right? Or this chain
Right.
method. Now, we import
so-
connect to MySQL, but where does connect to MySQL live? So we know what exactly to do. Does that live on this page? Or where is that established? Where's that method created?
The database.
What do you mean by that? Is it in my database, or is there a file of connects my
No,
database?
I think that it collects all the data and it takes it to the database.
Okay. But before that's this part, right? Where does this connect to MySQL even live? Trying to get you guys to think step by step how the computer works. It's not in my server PY.
MySQL connection.py.
Exactly. Right? That's where, if we scroll, that's where this lives. So you can think about it like it goes down, makes a request to my SQL connect. I'm just going to put connect because it's, I think I can make it. Okay. Goes to MySQL connection.py, right? And says, hey, I need to run connect to MySQL. And it says, okay, great. What that returns is a MySQL connection. So again, when we say that, what's that mean? When we're returning this class call, what's that mean?
It goes back to the video game .py.
Yes, it will, but we have to give it something back, right? So it stops and it actually runs this function or this instance creation. Right? It has to run this, and then once it has that value, then it returns. So it goes up and it runs this class, or because we're creating a new class, it runs really our constructor. And now what's our constructor doing? It is creating a connection to my database. So creates
It
that
loads-
connection.
It loads everything up once it's connected.
Yep, exactly. Now it creates that connection. You're exactly right, Estrella. It creates the connection because it returns this. And remember, this was my original function call. It returns this, which means it does this, and then it returns that value wherever that function was called. Or that function was called right here, right? So it returns my newly established connection. But we have this chained method. So while the connection's still open, it also runs this. And you can sort of think about it this way, like just know that because it's chained, it's gonna happen kind of instantaneously, but you can sort of think about it like this connect to MySQL portion goes and establishes my connection. And then my connection or my database is going to say, yep, we're good with the connection. We can connect, right? It communicates back. And then this file, or sorry, MySQL connection, once it's done running this, what does it do? It returns that back to, once that's created, where's that return this to? What file needs the connect to MySQL?
The connect to my, hold on. You said what file it connects back to?
Yeah,
My
exactly.
Connection goes back.
Where
to
is
the-
this returning this to?
So MySQL connection.py.
Well, MySQL connection.py is where I'm at. What called connect to MySQL? What file?
Oh, that's the server.py.
It's my video game, right? Right here. Remember when we call a function, it's going to go in there. It's going to run the function. This says I want to return a new instance. So before it can return it, it actually has to kind of do that math or do that whatever that instance is. So it comes up, runs my constructor because that's what happens when we create a new instance of a class. Once that connection is there, it returns. This becomes the value, right? Then we return that to here. So we go MySQL connection to video game PY. Now we have a chained method that says, hey, I need you to now query that connection. So you can sort of think about it. Like we have a
now it's
new,
going back. So
yep,
it's
now,
going back. It goes
now it's
up
going
or-
back exactly to
Okay.
MySQL connection. So it goes, okay, query DB. That's the method we give a query, which is this one, and we pass in our data, which is still up there, which still comes from right here, right? But we haven't gotten back to my server PY yet. We still just have gone back and forth here. So then it goes, okay, great. Let me go back to MySQL connection and let's run this method. And so it runs this. So this is good. It says if, and if it says it finds insert, well, if you look at our query, we have the word insert. So we know that it's going to give us back, it's going to return the ID of the instance that was just created. That's what this line is doing, is really just kind of running our query or this is running the query and then executes it. And then we commit it. And then this is just what it returns back, right? So in this query DB, our MySQL connection says with self connection.cursor, that's this connection that we just created, try, and it says query equals our query and data, which is what we passed in, query and data, right here. And then it says execute query. What this line does is then creates another MySQL connection. Where does it execute the query to? What stores my data or what handles these queries?
I think it's gonna go back up to the server just because we don't have, like, we already did the execute. We don't have, and that's where we did the insert. We don't have a select.
Well, what I'm saying is when we are running execute, now let's think about it. We're kind of following this, right? We go from our form, that's the yellow, to my server to my video game to MySQL connection, creates the connection to my database, gives back that response. MySQL connection says, hey, I've got the connection to video game, or I've got the connection, gives it back to video game right here. And video game says, okay, now go back. I want to run query_db. So that's where this red arrow is. Query_db is in MySQL connection. Where does MySQL connection communicate to run this query? What's going to store my data?
The form.
Not my form. Let's think about what part of our three-pronged system stores data.
Backend.
Not my backend.
The
What do we
s-
use to save information?
Oh my goodness. Um,
You guys are overthinking this.
I know.
The HTML part.
No,
It's in the server. That pie.
no. If I want to save some information,
Session.
we use session because we didn't have access to this yet because we hadn't learned it. What stores all of my user information? What do we set up in my ERD?
Our databases.
Exactly. Database is what stores our data. So it goes to here and runs the query. Now we see this line 27. It returns the ID. So if it is good to go, we get a new response from our database back to MySQL connection. Or sorry, yeah. So it returns, we get our value, executes the query. It'll give us some value and then it returns this ID. So once we get to this line, where's it returning to? Wherever called the function. So what called this query_db function? What file? Follow the colors?
Salvador.py.
No, not yet.
Is that the MySQL connection?
MySQL connection, this is the file for
I
MySQL
mean,
connection.
it's going back to the video game.
Exactly, right? We're going to go back to the video game.py with our value of last row of ID. So the ID of whatever we just created. So then we go, okay, great. A lot's happening in just this, right? We're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So we established this variable. Its value is the ID of whatever we just created. And then it says return game ID. Now, what are we returning? Or where are we returning to? What called the creation here?
The server.py.
Exactly. Then it takes it back to my server PY. And so my server PY says, okay. Now all of that, it returns the ID back, and now I have this variable of game ID. Because remember, this function call started all of this, right? Then it redirects to my dashboard, so it still stays within my server PY. It goes to my, finds my dashboard app route. It runs the method. It renders the template. And so what does my user get? Is this HTML. And so finally, after all that happens, we give a response to my user.
Kind of looks like a ping pong table. Well,
Yeah,
like it's stuck.
it
Ping,
feels
ping,
like
ping,
ping
ping,
pong.
ping.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Does that make some sense?
Kind
My
of.
goal is that you guys start understanding how the computer works, because then, okay, it's going to call this, and then it's going to go here, and then it's going to go here. So that way, when you're problem solving, you can say, okay, well, I know my server's great. So the next place this one goes my video game PY. Okay, that's good. So it must be something here, and then you can kind of like cross some things off the, if that makes sense.
Now we get that you're wanting us to understand for troubleshooting in the future.
Mhm.
But I think it's just like a lot happening at once,
Mm-hmm.
and we're all just trying to grasp all that
Yeah.
really rapidly. Because like you said, we don't see it, it just happens instantly.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were seeing it in action, like step by step, I guess,
Yeah.
it would be easier. But because it happens without us really seeing it,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just we kind of see it, but we don't see it.
Sure. Sure.
At least that's for me. I don't know about the rest of the guys.
You can rewatch the video, and it does help for sure.
I think getting in even if you wanted to break down, like as you guys are doing this, even I think drawing this out is just helpful of like, okay, when I call this, where is this located? Okay, well, it has to then go here. And it runs it. Okay, I'm staying on here, this first sort of execution. I'm just creating a new variable. I stay on this page. But this is not on this page. So what do I do? Just kind of thinking through what's happening. I think the biggest thing just to remember is when we set a variable equal to some sort of function or method call, it has to go finish running whatever that function or method is, get that total value, and then it returns it. But it says, cool, let me go get it. And in this case, create game is not something super simple to where it just says, create game, return the number 5, and then it would just return the number 5 right here. But instead, it connects to MySQL database, and then once there's a connection, it queries the database, and we get a value back. And then we take that value and we put it in a variable and return that variable. So there's just a lot of moving pieces. But I think, again, thinking through, and this has helped me a ton in my coding career, of being able to problem solve and say, like, okay, if something's not working, first off, I would say, is my route good? Right? I would check my index. Is my route good? Okay, it is. That's not my issue. Okay, so I called this data. Do these match? Once I'd say, okay, these do match. Okay. And they match my index.html. Okay, so I know that that's good. Right? Then I go, okay, well, I'm doing this. This is going to go to here. It's going to run this. Is my query good? Is this a good query? Okay, it is good. All right, so let's test out and see what's happening. And so let's say that it wasn't working. I would print game ID. I'd say, well, what am I getting back from my database? Right? And you can sort of start thinking about, because in this case, connect to MySQL and QueryDB were given to you, but I would say like, oh, is my database the right name? Okay, it is. Okay, well, I trust that connect to MySQL and QueryDB are good. So what am I getting back from my database? Oh, excuse me. What am I getting back from my database? What is happening? And so it just helps you sort of process through and eliminate things that could be the error until you actually find the error, which is going to be most of your job. Most of the time, you're not writing a ton of new code. Depends on where you work, I guess I should say. But you're going to be inheriting code and either rewriting it or debugging or getting, features, and you have to go try to learn. And this is really going to be helpful when you have a job because you're going to have this code base that's maybe millions of lines of code and you have to keep following. Okay, now this is calling here, so let me go find that. And what's that doing? What is causing this error? And so kind of getting used to that practice is going to be really, really helpful. Okay. I'm going to delete this. Are you guys okay if I delete this visual?
Yes, I already drew it.
Okay,
Thank you.
perfect. Yeah. Okay. So that's all that's happening with our create game. But now we need to get a game. Right? So what I want and what I'm envisioning is once a game is created, maybe we can go to our dashboard. Oops. Our dashboard HTML, and maybe that has just a table of all of my games. Kind of sounds like pretty good to me. So let's focus on getting my games first. So I'm going to create a class method. And maybe I'm going to call this get all games. Def get all games. Now, let's walk through what we just did. We created this def get all games. It is a class method, so we have to take in CLS. I'm not giving it any data though, right? I don't really need anything or any sort of values because I'm just retrieving all. If I was gonna just get one game, I would have to take in some value, or if I had something, all that had this specific genre, fine. But my query doesn't have any sort of values, just like create does, right? So I actually don't have to pass in anything for data. My query is very simple. It's select all from games. Cool. Now, what if we look at, we're running a select. If we go to the MySQL connection, we can see select queries will return the data from the database as a list of dictionaries. So it's going to give me a list of dictionaries. Each dictionary is going to represent a specific instance of my video game. But it's going to represent it, but in a dictionary form. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. Now we're going to do something a little funky, but stay with me. I am going to create a list. Now, this is a list of dictionaries. This is not a list of video game instances. I'll say that again. It is a list of dictionaries. It is not a list of video game instances. You could sort of think about it as it's just read only. Can't do anything with it, but it'll give you the values. Now there's times that maybe I've got a static method. You can really think about this as like if we had a user, maybe I have a static method. I have a first name and last name, and I have a static method that's just called first name, or an instance method called first name, or sorry, full name. And so maybe instead of me wanting to have them separate, I just want to have a method that I could just show the full name. If it's just dictionaries, I don't have that capability because again, it's just read only. It doesn't have any of the power that my video game instance has. It doesn't have any of the power that my video game instance has. So what we want to do instead is results is just a list of dictionaries. We're going to loop through that, through those dictionaries, and we're going to say for game in results. Then we are going to append to my games list here. We're going to append a class instance. So we're going to make it do this of each game. Then we will return games. So again, this is a, oops. Sorry. I'm going to say is a when we come down here, they're going to be called objects, which is the same thing as like an instance. So again, we iterate through my list of dictionaries. We create this variable here. And then we say for game in results. We iterate through that. And we add the class instance of each dictionary or each game we have. And that's going to give us the power of a class. Again, when we deal with users, I'll show you how that works. But no, it's much better to have a list of instances or objects than it is to have a list of just dictionaries. Because dictionaries, again, they're read-only. You can't do anything with them. You just read them and that's it. You lose all the power of OOP and instance-based coding. So this is going to give me once it's done, my list of video game objects. And so what we can do is I'm gonna come here, in my server PY, I don't need to add anything else. I can just pass in an object, right? So I can say this. All games equals video game dot get all games. So before it even does this HTML portion, remember when a variable equals this call, what does its value become? When a variable equals a function or method call, what does the variable's value become?
Whatever you're asking for.
Whatever that method or function call returns. Remember, when a function's value is whatever it returns. If it doesn't return anything, its value is none. A function call's value is whatever it returns. And so in this case, when we say all games equals video game.getAllGames, it's going to return to me my instance of games. Right? And so all games is going to equal my list of video game objects. And so what we can do is let's go grab Bootstrap. And then we're going to create a table. Cool. Oops. So we can say something like this. Now, remember when we pass in a value, we refer to it on my front end as whatever the variable is called. So in this case, it's not games. It is all games. So games. Now what this is doing is this is just creating a basic table. Then this is a list of game objects. So I iterate through using Jinja. I can do a for loop. Remember, I do my curly bracket, parentheses, and now I can do some Jinja code. I say for game in all games. This refers to whatever I call it here. And now it's going to iterate through, and each time I now can say game dot title, game dot rating, dot platform, dot development studio, game dot ID, game dot created at and updated at. If I had any static methods like full name, I could say game dot full name. And that's really like the full name portion is really where the power comes from having these as a different class, having these as a class. I end my for, and my table's done. So let's go ahead and do this. Cool. So let's come here. I'm going to say localhost 5,000. Cool. Remember, we created this dashboard here. So I could actually just click on it if I wanted. And when I go to /dashboard, it's going to go and retrieve in my database all the games in my database. Let's go back and let's create a new one, and we'll see that we'll create a new one and it's going to retrieve it. So anybody have a favorite video game? I've already put mine.
Kingdom Hearts.
Kingdom Hearts. What's its rating, Kevin?
Pretty sure it was E for everyone.
E for everyone. And then what kind of platform? Is it cross-platform?
It was a PlayStation 2.
He took it back.
And then what is the development studio? Do you know?
Yeah, it's Squaresoft. Well, what's now Square Enix, what was then Squaresoft. It's a really old game. It came out back in 2002.
Oh, I remember.
So-
I remember all of the Kingdom Hearts.
Oh,
There was always the commercials for Kingdom Hearts.
yeah.
Okay. So when I create this game, it now takes me here. And I have, so what it did is it went create game. Just gonna go very quickly. Create game, goes into my server. It takes all of my new values. We've already walked through, it goes into my video game, runs create game, gives back an ID. Comes back here, it redirects to my dashboard. Then it renders template, all games, which then calls all games again. So it goes back to my video game, runs this, gives me all those values, returns this HTML. And because we passed it in as a value, I can now iterate through and I can now see all of my games. Seeing you can see the two queries that we ran. We inserted into and we inserted our game. And then once that was done, we got sent back to dashboard. We select all from games. Does that make sense?
Yes, you made it look so easy.
ChatGPT. Just kidding. Okay.
Sure, once we get into it, then we'll
Yeah.
get into the flow and the rhythm. But right now it's just like, okay, it's a lot to process. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. That's all I've got for tonight. We didn't do an algo, but we're 2 minutes till the end of time anyway. I think this was much more important for us to sit and process and try to do. It's your first time dealing with full stack stuff. So I wouldn't expect you to get it. Again, I was dealing with people 4 weeks ahead and I gave the same walkthrough of from front end to back end. And they even were like, this was a lot, but it helps. But I'm just gonna have to get used to it. So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, please don't. This is your first time dealing with this. You have another 6 weeks before the exam even opens. So we got plenty of time for you to digest and understand this code. Cool. Any questions on what we've done?
Yeah, so anytime you see like a name and then a dot, like video game dot get all games, anytime you see a dot uh between two things, is that like a chaining method?
So this isn't a chain because this is saying that this video game that we have up here, that this has a method called get all games. So this is saying as part of my video game class, there should be a class method called get all games. This
Okay.
here, when I've got a function call, or in this case, it's a method because it's part of another class. This is a method call. And then you have another one immediately after. This is called a chained method. Remember, a method and a function are the exact same thing. We just call it a method if it's associated to a class. If it's not associated to a class, we call it a function. But because Connect to MySQL and QueryDB are part of the MySQL connection class, then we can we call those methods. So when you've got these two methods with a dot, yeah, that's a chained method. When we just have the class name dot, we're saying that this class video game has a method called all games. Does that make sense?
So the only chain is on the MySQL.py.
Mm-hmm.
That's not I mean the
Right
video
here.
game. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other is just saying there's a class, that class has a method, and I want to run it. Or go into this class and you'll find this method called get all names, and let's run that. Because let's say that I had another class called board games. It could also have a method called get all games. And the way I would differentiate hey, I want you to get all my board games, or I want you to get all my video games is I would say board game dot get all games. And that's how the computer knows, okay, go into that class and run the method. But if I wanted all video games, I say video game dot get all games and be like, okay, I'll go in there and grab those methods or run that method. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's just going to the method and get the data that it needs. Or
It's going to the class and then running the method that it needs. Yep. And this, again, if I had multiple get all games within my entire code, this differentiates which get all games do you want me to run? Or there might be like get all. So I might have a user class and a video game class, but I might just have a get all. And I say, I want to get all, the way it knows, okay, go into my database, get all my users, or go into my database, get all my video games is I would say user dot get all or video game dot get all. And that sort of tells my computer which one to go to run. Cool. Any other questions, my friends?
No, well, I think you smoked our brains tonight.
I feel like I've been doing that for a while. Like, so I don't know if that's more of the materials just stepping up, or I'm not delivering it in a good way, or I'm overwhelming you.
It's definitely the material.
Okay,
Definitely.
good.
Yeah.
If you need,
No, it's just material too.
yeah, it's tough, but now we're getting in the trudge of it.
Yeah.
We're getting in the trudge of it. So, all right, friends. Well, I will stop the recording there.